Outside, the glass tower blanketed in snow at the heart of Chicago. Cold-blooded CEO Victoria Hale had just fired a single father in front of his young daughter. The little girl trembled inside a thin, worn coat, her tears mixing with the heavy snowflakes falling around her. Minutes later, the entire building plunged into darkness. The elevators locked, the heating system shut down in the middle of the worst winter storm of the year. And the only person who truly understood that tower's infrastructure, the only one who could bring it back to life, had just been escorted out the front door by Victoria's order. The lobby of Hale Dynamics at 7:45 in the morning looked exactly the way Victoria Hale liked it. Quiet, efficient, and cold. The marble floors reflected the pale gray light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, Lake Michigan had disappeared behind a wall of white. The storm had been forecast for days, and Chicago was bracing for record lows before noon. Victoria stood near the reception desk in a charcoal blazer, her dark hair pulled back without a single strand out of place. She had a tablet in one hand and a file in the other. She hadn't bothered with pleasantries since arriving at 6. That was the way she operated. Decisive, early, and unencumbered by sentiment. Daniel Brooks came in through the service entrance at 7:50. He was 37, lean and quietly capable, with the kind of face that didn't advertise anything. He worked as the senior building systems engineer for Hale Dynamics, the man responsible for HVAC, electrical infrastructure, elevator controls, and the backup power matrix that most executives didn't know existed until something broke. He'd been in the role for 4 years. Before that, he'd served 2 tours with the Army Corps of Engineers. He knew how to read broken systems the way other people read books. Behind him, holding the hand he'd offered her at the curb, was his daughter Lily, 8 years old. She wore a puffy orange coat that had been re-zipped 3 times since they left the car. Daniel had a custody arrangement that gave him full care Monday through Friday, and today the school district had called a snow day at 6 in the morning. The backup plan, his neighbor Mrs. Gerhardt, had slipped on her porch steps and was at the urgent care clinic, so Lily came to work with him, just for the morning, just until the building was checked and the storm protocols were confirmed. He'd arranged it with his supervisor the night before. Victoria looked up from her tablet when she heard the service door. She saw Lily first. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. She crossed the lobby in 8 steps. "Mr. Brooks, Miss Hale, good morning." He didn't flinch at her tone. He never did. "You brought a child into this building on the morning of a critical infrastructure review. She's not in the way. I cleared it with Marcus last night. School was canceled. Marcus doesn't authorize exceptions to facility policy. I do." She turned her head briefly toward Lily, who had stopped walking and was staring up at Victoria with wide gray eyes. Then she looked back at Daniel. "And I'm looking at a report from last Thursday's safety audit. You bypassed the lockout protocol on Unit 7B during the heating repair. I bypassed a redundant interlock because the primary circuit was showing a false positive. I logged it. I documented my reasoning. The system held. The system held this time. That's how engineering works, Miss Hale. Judgment calls based on, I'm not interested in a lecture on engineering philosophy." She held out the file. "Your access card and your building credentials are being deactivated as of 8 o'clock. HR will process your separation paperwork by end of day." The lobby went still. The receptionist behind the desk pretended to be very busy with her keyboard. A security guard near the elevator bank looked at the floor. Daniel didn't take the file immediately. He looked at Victoria for 3 full seconds. Then he took it. "Daddy." Lily's voice was very small. "Why is she so mean?" Victoria's jaw tightened. She said nothing. Daniel crouched down to his daughter's level and adjusted the zipper on her coat collar. "We're going to go back to the car, okay? We'll figure out the rest." He stood, gave Victoria one last look, and turned toward the door. He almost made it out before he stopped, not because he changed his mind about arguing he hadn't. He stopped because something caught his eye through the glass. A maintenance panel on the east exterior wall, half obscured by blown snow. The access cover was slightly ajar. He stared at it for exactly 2 seconds, cataloging it the way he cataloged everything. Then the wind shifted, the snow came harder, and he pushed through the door into the cold. Victoria watched them go. Her hand, holding the file, was perfectly steady, but she stood at the window for a moment longer than she needed to. At 8:03, the lights in the lobby flickered. At 8:04, every light in Hale Dynamics went out. It wasn't a gradual fade. It was a hard cut. Displays, overheads, exit signs, the emergency lighting strip above the elevator doors. Everything. The backup generator was supposed to engage within 4 seconds. The 4 seconds came and went. In the dark, someone in the elevator bank said, quietly and precisely, the kind of word that gets spoken when professionalism breaks under pressure. Sandra Keene, Victoria's executive assistant, appeared at her elbow with a flashlight app already running on her phone. The boardroom is on the 14th floor. Meridian Capital's team is landing at O'Hare in 90 minutes. If they can't get in the building, I know what the timeline is, Sandra. The chief of IT security, a focused man named Garrett Holloway, came down the stairwell at a near run. He was 40, trim, methodical. He'd been with Hale Dynamics for 6 years and had a reputation for solving problems before most people had finished describing them. He did not look like a man who had solved this one. The primary grid is down. Backup core isn't responding. I've got my team on it, but he hesitated. But what, Garrett? The shutdown wasn't triggered by the storm. It was triggered manually. Someone used a physical override on the auxiliary power node in sub-basement 2. It's an electromechanical lock. It can't be undone remotely. Someone has to go down there and disengage it by hand. Victoria processed this in about 2 seconds. Who knows that system? Garrett opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Brooks, he said. Daniel Brooks designed the redundancy architecture on that node when he came on 4 years ago. He's the only one who's ever worked on it directly. My team has the documentation, but the documentation is on servers that are currently offline. In elevator shaft 3, 23 people were trapped between the 6th and 7th floors. The temperature in the building had already dropped 3 degrees. A $2 billion acquisition deal was scheduled to close in a boardroom that currently had no power, no heat, and no working communications beyond whatever was running on phone batteries. Victoria stood in the middle of the dark lobby and made a precise inventory of what she had and what she needed. What she needed was outside in the parking structure, probably still trying to start his truck. The wind hit her like a physical thing when she pushed through the main doors. She hadn't stopped for a coat. The snow was coming sideways now, and the temperature on her phone read 4 degrees Fahrenheit. She moved through it without slowing down because slowing down would have given her time to think about what she was doing, and she didn't want that time. She found Daniel's truck in spot C14, a blue F-150 with a child's snow boot print on the running board and a faded Army Corps of Engineers decal on the rear window. The engine was running. Through the fogged glass, she could see Lily in the back seat, already buckled, already watching something on a tablet. Daniel was in the driver's seat with both hands on the wheel and his eyes straight ahead. Victoria knocked on the window. He looked at her for a moment. Then he rolled it down. The heat from inside the cab rolled out against the cold. She felt it on her face and didn't acknowledge it. The building lost full power 8 minutes ago. Backup systems are non-responsive. There are 23 people in an elevator between 6 and 7. The heat is already off. She paused. The shutdown was manual. Sub-basement 2, the override node you built. He said nothing for a moment. She could see him processing not her, not the irony, just the problem. That was something she recognized, even if she hadn't acknowledged it before. What's the ambient in the basement? I don't know. Is the service stair accessible? As far as I know. He looked in the rearview mirror at Lily. The little girl had looked up from her tablet. Daddy? Give me a second, Bug. He turned back to Victoria. She expected him to make her ask again, to make her say it more explicitly. Instead, he just said, "I'm going to need you to stay with my daughter." That stopped her. "I can't. I'm not leaving her alone in a parking structure in a blizzard. You asked me to come back. That's the condition." Victoria looked at Lily, who was watching her with the steady, unblinking assessment that 8-year-olds are capable of when they've decided to evaluate an adult. "Fine," Victoria said. He was out of the truck in 4 seconds. He opened the back door, crouched, and spoke quietly to Lily for about 30 seconds. The little girl nodded twice. He pointed at Victoria. Lily looked at her again, this time differently, like she was revising her assessment. Daniel straightened up. "She doesn't like strangers touching her stuff. Don't offer food unless she asks. If she gets upset, don't tell her to calm down. Just talk slow and keep your voice flat." "I understand. I was wrong about the shutdown," he said. It took her a beat to realize he wasn't talking about this morning's events, he was talking about the system. "What do you mean?" That auxiliary node was the safest part of the building. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't random. He pulled his collar up and walked toward the building entrance without looking back. Victoria got into the driver's seat. Lily stared at her. "He said you're the mean lady." Lily said. "He said that?" "No, I said that. He said you made a decision you might want to change." Victoria said nothing. She watched the building through the windshield. Sub-basement 2 was 32 feet below street level and had not seen maintenance since the previous October. Daniel moved through it with a flashlight from the emergency kit he'd pulled from the truck bed, a habit from field deployments, carrying a go-bag in the vehicle. The air was cold and damp and smelled like concrete and old insulation. Garrett Holloway met him at the sub-basement entry with 2 members of his team, a young network technician named Pete Calloway and a facilities coordinator named Beverly Marsh, who had found a physical copy of the infrastructure blueprint in a locked cabinet on the 3rd floor. "The node should be behind panel F7, Beverly said, spreading the blueprint across a dry section of floor and holding the flashlight steady. "East wall, near the secondary conduit trunk." "I know where it is," Daniel said. He wasn't being dismissive, he just didn't need the map. He'd spent 8 hours down here the first winter he was on the job, rewiring the redundancy sequence after a voltage surge took out 2 of the primary breakers. He could have navigated the space blind. He found panel F7 inches 90 seconds. The access cover had been opened and relatched, but not properly. There was a 0.5 millimeter gap along the lower right edge. Someone had been in a hurry. He unlatched it and shone the light inside. The override key was in the locked position. That wasn't what stopped him. What stopped him was the additional device wired into the secondary bus, a small electromechanical relay, commercial grade, the kind you could order online. It had been spliced in between the node and the output circuit. If he simply disengaged the override key, the relay would interpret it as an unauthorized reversal and send a shutdown signal to the HVAC master controller on the 4th floor, the one system that hadn't been affected yet. "Garrett," he said, without turning around, "does your team have a wire cutter and a multimeter?" "Pete, go." Pete Calloway was back in 4 minutes. By then, Daniel had traced the relay's circuit path with his flashlight and identified the 2 leads he needed to cut in the right sequence. Cut the wrong one first, and the relay would trigger. Cut the right one, and the override node could be disengaged cleanly. "You're sure?" Garrett asked. "I'm sure. Stand back." He clipped the first lead. Nothing happened. He clipped the second lead. In the silence of the sub-basement, they heard distantly, muffled by floors of concrete, the sound of emergency lighting systems engaging. The building's backup matrix was online. "Elevators?" Daniel said. Garrett was already on his radio. He listened. "Elevator 3 is moving. They're out." Beverly let out a breath that had been held for some time. Daniel disengaged the override key, and somewhere in the building's mechanical core, the heating system's primary pumps began their restart sequence. It would take 20 minutes for warmth to reach the upper floors. But the building was alive again. Someone put this relay in deliberately, Daniel said, holding up the clipped device. This took planning. They knew the layout of this node. They knew the circuit path. He looked at Garrett. Who else has sub-basement access clearance? Garrett's expression shifted in a way that wasn't comfortable to look at. Back on the first floor, with emergency lighting casting everything in flat amber, Daniel moved to the secondary systems terminal in the facility's office, an old workstation that ran on its own isolated power circuit, designed as a last resort diagnostics station. He'd insisted on it when he redesigned the backup architecture. No one had been happy about the budget line. He was glad he'd won that argument. The terminal was slow. It ran on a version of the building management software that predated the cloud migration by 6 years, but it had access to local logs, time-stamped records of every physical access point in the building going back 18 months. He pulled up Sub-Basement 2. The access log showed 4 entries in the last 72 hours. 2 were his own maintenance checks from Monday. 1 was Beverly Marsh, who'd been running a routine inspection Wednesday afternoon. The 4th entry was from last night at 11:47, under a keycard assigned to the Executive Operations Suite. Garrett. He turned the screen. Garrett looked at it for a long time. Then he said, very carefully, "That's Richard Cole's card." Richard Cole was 61 years old and had been with Hale Dynamics for 16 years. He was the chief operating officer, the man who ran day-to-day operations, who managed vendor relationships, who had been in the room for every major deal the company had done for over a decade. He was well-liked in a careful, deliberate way. He had a corner office on the 19th floor and framed photographs of himself with 3 governors and 2 senators. He also had, Daniel now understood, detailed knowledge of the building's infrastructure because he had been in every facilities review meeting for 16 years. He would have known about the auxiliary node. He might not have known how to wire the relay himself, but he would have known who to pay to do it. Why would Cole sabotage his own company's deal? Beverly asked. Not his own company's deal. Garrett was already pulling something up on his phone, working from memory. Cole has been in negotiations with Meridian Capital's primary competitor, a firm out of New York called Stratford Group, for the past 3 months. I've been watching some anomalous outbound data transfers. I didn't have enough to take to Victoria yet. He paused. If the Meridian deal falls through today, Stratford moves in, and if Cole has already agreed to terms with Stratford, he walks away with a consulting contract and stock options in the acquiring firm, Daniel said, while Hale Dynamics loses $2 billion in equity. Garrett put his phone away. I need to reach Victoria. Daniel looked at the access log again. He's still in the building. He pointed at the screen. His card was used to enter the executive floor at 7:58 this morning. It hasn't been used to exit. They were both quiet for a second. The network, Daniel said. The financial systems. If the building power was step 1, the company network is still locked, Garrett said. We restored building power, but the financial systems are on a separate encrypted server cluster. If someone pushed a lockout command to that cluster before the power went down, then restoring power doesn't restore the network. Daniel straightened. How long until the board meeting starts? 28 minutes. The financial server cluster for Hale Dynamics lived in a hardened room on the 12th floor, behind a biometric lock and a reinforced door. It was not, under normal circumstances, accessible to anyone outside of the IT security team. But the biometric system ran on building power, which was now partially restored, and Garrett Holloway had a master override that he'd been carrying for 6 years without ever having to use it. They moved up 12 flights of stairs at a pace that wasn't quite running but wasn't walking either. Daniel, Garrett, and Pete Calloway. Beverly had gone to the lobby to brief Sandra Keene and coordinate with the Meridian Capital team, who had just called from the parking structure, wanting to know whether to come inside or rebook their return flights. The 12th floor was cold and dark except for the amber emergency strips. The server room door stood at the end of a short hallway. Garrett pressed his palm to the biometric reader. It beeped once, processed for 4 seconds, and unlocked. Inside, the servers were running on their own UPS battery backup, warm, humming, indifferent to the chaos around them. Pete went directly to the master console. His fingers were moving before he'd fully sat down. Someone pushed a full authentication lockout at 8:02, Pete said. All financial system credentials invalidated. The unlock sequence requires a 2-person authorization biometric and a 12-digit code. I have the biometric, Garrett said. Victoria has the code. Daniel was already on his phone. The call connected after 2 rings. This is Daniel Brooks. I'm in the server room on 12 with Garrett Holloway. We need your authorization code to restore financial system access. We have 23 minutes. A pause. Then Victoria's voice, careful and even. Tell me the server room temperature. There's a thermometer on the east wall. Daniel looked. 68 degrees Fahrenheit. That's correct. Another pause. The code is 4719 Kilo 3 3 Alpha 82 Foxtrot 6. He repeated it to Garrett, who entered it at the console. Pete ran the authentication sequence. It's working, Pete said quietly. Systems are coming back online. Email, financial platforms, the document management system. He let out a slow breath. Boardroom A. V is online. What about Cole? Garrett asked. His outbound data transfer was queued but not completed. The lockout hit while it was still running. The proprietary files are still here. Pete looked up. He almost got them. Almost, Daniel said. He walked to the window. Through the frost on the glass, 15 floors up, he could barely see the parking structure where his truck sat running. Where Lily was, where Victoria was, presumably still in the driver's seat, not touching anything. Someone needs to go find Richard Cole, he said. Richard Cole had not left the building because he was waiting for confirmation. That was his mistake, the same mistake meticulous people made when they'd planned something carefully and couldn't resist watching it unfold. He was in the 19th floor conference room, the small one with the glass wall that overlooked the city, with a phone in his hand and a go-bag by the door. Daniel found him because he understood the building, not just the mechanical systems, but the patterns of how people moved through it. He knew which floors had operational emergency lighting, and which were still dark. He knew which stairwells were fastest. He knew that anyone waiting for a quiet confirmation call on a morning like this would go somewhere with an exterior view, somewhere they could watch the street. He pushed open the conference room door. Cole looked up. He processed the situation in about 2 seconds. The fact that the building had power again, the fact that it was Daniel standing in the doorway, and not one of his own people, the fact that the go-bag by the door was now a liability and not an asset. Brooks. Cole's voice was steady. He was a man who'd spent 16 years managing crises that other people caused. He knew how to project calm. This is a restricted floor. You used your card to access Subbasement 2 at 11:47 last night. Daniel walked into the room. He didn't raise his voice. You installed an electromechanical relay on the auxiliary power node. It wasn't subtle, it was fast. You were counting on the building staying dark long enough for your data transfer to complete. That's a significant accusation. The log is on the terminal in the facilities office. The relay is in Garrett Holloway's hand right now, and the data transfer you queued didn't complete the lockout hit while it was still running. Everything is still here. Cole set his phone on the conference table. He looked out the window at the white city below. For a moment, he looked genuinely tired. I've been here 16 years, he said. Before Victoria Hale was running this company, I was the one keeping it alive. Every acquisition, every restructuring, every time the board got nervous, I was the one in the room. And she walks in, she restructures, she reorients everything around her vision. And I'm he, stopped. Irrelevant? Daniel said. Expendable. Cole's jaw tightened. She was going to push me out after this deal closed. I had the memo. I've known for 6 weeks, so you decided to take the deal with you. I decided to survive. The door behind Daniel opened. Victoria Hale walked in. She'd left Lily in the truck with Sandra Keene, who had come out to the parking structure when she'd heard that the board meeting was back online and that something else was happening on 19. Victoria looked at Cole for a long time. Whatever she was feeling was somewhere behind her eyes, not on her face. "Richard," she said. "Victoria." He met her gaze. "I want you to know I didn't plan for anyone to get hurt." The elevator lockout was supposed to be brief. 23 people were in that elevator, in 4-degree weather, with no heat and no communication. Her voice was quiet and very precise. "And you installed a sabotage relay on a system built by a man you expected me to keep fired while this happened." Cole said nothing. 2 Chicago PD officers appeared in the doorway behind Victoria. Garrett Holloway was with them. "He'll want his attorney," Victoria said to the officers. She turned and walked out without looking at Cole again. The heating system reached the upper floors at 9:47. Daniel knew this because he was monitoring it from the 4th-floor HVAC control room, watching the temperature readouts climb floor by floor on a screen that was now fully powered. He'd been methodical about it, restarting the systems in sequence rather than all at once, letting the building warm gradually from the bottom up. Forcing heat through cold ducts too quickly caused pressure fluctuations in older systems. He knew this one. By 10:15, Boardroom A on the 14th floor was 66 degrees, had full lighting and a functioning video conference system. The Meridian Capital team had come inside at 9:55. Their lead attorney, a focused woman named Caroline Brandt, had asked Sandra Keene what on earth had happened, and Sandra had given her the short version, a systems disruption that had been resolved. "Resolved?" Caroline repeated, looking around the fully operational boardroom. "Yes," Sandra said. Caroline seemed to decide that some explanations were better received after the documents were signed. Victoria ran the meeting herself. She was 17 minutes late, which she acknowledged once and then moved past. She had a bruise on the back of her left hand from where she'd gripped a parking structure railing in the wind. She didn't mention it. The Meridian team had their documents ready. Hale Dynamics' legal team was already seated. At 10:59, the acquisition agreement was signed. $2 billion. 3 years of negotiation. The room was professional enough not to celebrate openly, but Caroline Brandt shook Victoria's hand for 3 seconds longer than necessary, and Victoria let her. Downstairs, in the sub-basement, Daniel was doing what engineers do after a crisis, documenting everything. Every cut wire, every circuit path, every timestamp. He took photographs with his phone. He wrote notes in the field notebook he carried in his jacket pocket. He would turn this over to Garrett's team and to the police forensics unit that was now working their way through the building. When he finally came back up to the lobby, it was after 11. The storm outside had softened. The snow was still falling, but gently now, the kind of snow that covered things quietly instead of punishing them. He found Lily sitting on a bench near the reception desk with her tablet, a paper cup of hot chocolate Sandra had procured from the cafe on the 2nd floor, and a blanket someone had brought from the supply closet. She was drawing something on a piece of paper. "Hey, Bug." "Hey, Dad." She didn't look up. "Did you fix it?" "Yeah, I figured." Victoria found him in the lobby at 11:30. He was standing near the window, watching the snow. He'd washed his hands in the 2nd-floor bathroom, but there was still grease under his fingernails from the relay work. He looked like a man who'd spent the morning doing exactly what he was built to do, and who was now deciding what came next. She walked up and stood beside him, not quite shoulder to shoulder, a deliberate distance. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, a city maintenance truck moved slowly down the street, orange lights rotating. "I made a decision this morning based on a report I didn't fully interrogate," Victoria said. "The safety audit flagged the bypass you made on Unit 7B. I treated the flag as a conclusion. That was wrong. She paused. You documented your reasoning. I didn't read the documentation. He said nothing. The building protocol violation was real. But your judgment call preserved the system. A more rigid approach would have left the heating offline for 2 additional hours during a cold snap. She turned to look at him. I was wrong. He looked at her. Not skeptically, not warmly, just directly. Sandra is drawing up a reinstatement letter, she continued. I'd like you to return as Director of Building Systems. You'd have full authority over your team's methodology, no override from executive operations without your written sign-off. A pause. Richard's position is vacant. I'm restructuring the COO function. Building and infrastructure operations would report directly to me. That's a significant restructure, he said. It's overdue. She looked back at the window. The people in that elevator this morning, the building staff, the IT team, they were depending on systems that I didn't understand as well as I should have. I let that slide because I thought operational detail was someone else's domain. She was quiet for a moment. It won't slide again. He watched her. He was thinking about the access panel on the east exterior wall, the one he'd noticed when he was leaving. He hadn't said anything about it because he'd assumed it was a maintenance issue he'd get back to Monday. He understood, now, that the assumption of getting back to it had its own kind of cost. Lily, he said. Victoria blinked. What? You should apologize to Lily. He said it without heat. She was frightened this morning. She doesn't understand corporate decisions. She understands how people treat each other. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she crossed the lobby to the bench where Lily was drawing. She didn't sit. She crouched, eye level. Hi, she said. Lily looked up. Her gray eyes assessed Victoria with the same thoroughness as before, but differently this time, looking for something specific. This morning was scary, Victoria said. Not just for you, and I didn't handle it the way I should have. I'm sorry. Lily considered this. She looked down at her drawing, then back up. Do you want to see what I drew? She asked. Victoria looked at the paper. It was the building Hale Dynamics, recognizable from its glass facade rendered in blue crayon with orange windows and what appeared to be a small figure on the roof. Who's on the roof? Victoria asked. That's you, Lily said matter-of-factly. I didn't know where else to put you. Victoria looked at the drawing for another moment. Then she said, He didn't give her an answer that day. She hadn't expected one, which surprised her when she noticed it that she hadn't gone into the conversation expecting an immediate yes, the way she usually expected immediate compliance. She'd gone in expecting to be honest, and that was a different posture entirely. He took 3 days. During that time, he reviewed the reinstatement offer with his own attorney, a practical woman named Ellen Kraft who specialized in employment contracts and had a low tolerance for vague language. Ellen made 2 changes to the language around decision-making authority. Victoria's legal team accepted both without negotiation, which Ellen found notable. He also spoke briefly with Garrett Holloway, who called on a Tuesday evening to confirm that the Chicago Police Department had filed formal charges against Richard Cole. The forensics team had traced the relay component to an electronics supply store on the north side, purchased 11 days earlier in cash. Cole had been methodical, Garrett said, with a tone that implied reluctant professional respect. He had simply underestimated the variable he couldn't account for, the fact that the man who designed the system was still in the building. Daniel thanked him and put the phone down. He was making grilled cheese for Lily's dinner at the time. She was at the kitchen table doing her homework, asking him every few minutes how to spell words she could have looked up. He never pointed that out. He just spelled them. He also had a second conversation, briefer, with Garrett Holloway, who called on a Tuesday evening to say that the Chicago PD had filed formal charges against Richard Cole, and that the forensics team had confirmed the origin of the relay component. The device had been purchased 11 days earlier at an electronics supply store on the north side. paid for in cash. Cole had been methodical, which Garrett said with a kind of professional admiration he seemed to regret. He'd just been unlucky that the man who designed the system was in the parking lot when it failed. Thursday was cold but clear. The storm had moved east, and Chicago wore the aftermath. Snow packed against building bases, sidewalks scraped down to concrete, the sky an uncomplicated blue above the lake, the kind of morning that looked severe but didn't punish you for being outside in it. He brought Lily again, not because there was a school closure or a childcare emergency, because Lily had asked to come, and because he'd decided that a place that was going to be part of their daily life should be introduced properly. On a good day, not one that started with termination notices and blizzards, they came in through the main entrance. The lobby was bright. The heating was running at its correct set point. Daniel had checked the system remotely from home that morning, a habit he'd kept since reinstalling the building management app on his phone 3 days ago. The reception desk was staffed. The floor was clean. Everything was the way a building lobby was supposed to be. Sandra met them near the elevator with a badge lanyard and a visitor sticker shaped like a star, which she gave to Lily without making a production of it. "Miss Hale is finishing a call," Sandra said to Daniel. "She'll be down in 10. "That's fine." Lily put the star sticker on her coat and went to stand near the window, looking out at the street. Daniel stood with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at the building around him at the elevator bank that was running clean, the lighting that was at full capacity, the exterior panels he could see from here that were properly sealed. His systems, his work. Victoria appeared at 11 minutes past. She wore a dark blazer, no different from the one she'd been wearing last Thursday, but she walked differently, not slower, not softer exactly, just more deliberately, like someone who had recently recalibrated what paying attention meant. She stopped in front of Daniel. "Thank you for coming in." "Thank you for the contract language," he said. "The decision authority clause is workable. Ellen Craft is thorough." "She is." A brief pause, the kind that happens when two precise people have said what they mean and are deciding whether there's more. "I'm going to be difficult to work for," Victoria said. "I expect detailed documentation. I ask follow-up questions. I don't move on until I understand something." She held his gaze. "But I'm going to read the documentation now. That's all I'd ask," he said. She extended her hand. He shook it. From the window, without turning around, Lily said, "Are you guys done being professional? I want to see the elevators." Victoria looked at the back of the 8-year-old's head. Something moved in her expression that wasn't quite a smile but was in the same neighborhood. "The elevators are on the east wall," she said. "I'll show you." Lily turned around. She regarded Victoria with her standard thoroughness. Then she nodded once, which was apparently approval. They crossed the lobby together, the CEO, the engineer, and the girl in the orange coat toward the elevator bank. Outside, the snow on the sidewalk caught the morning light.